For 7 long weeks, little Netherlands held Asia's titan China to gunpoint. Perhaps still living in the 19th century, the Dutch seized the chip company Nexperia, a move that shocked the world. It was meant to be the start of Europe's unified pushback against Beijing's technological expansion. It was supposed to be the ultimate defense of Western supply chain. But it was not meant to be. Hello and good evening, everybody. My name is Rufus Brown, and I welcome you to the last thing before sleeping. In this video, I am giving you an update of the Nexperia issue. If you are new to it, I have a Nexperia Saga playlist where you can go through my detailed analysis of the issue as it unfolds. Now back to the story. The seizure is over. Done. In a stunning reversal that can only be read as a victory for Beijing, the Dutch government has suspended its takeover of Nexperia. In other words, they have let go of their Cold War-era claim. The political fight is, for now, finished. But to understand why the Dutch government packed up its intervention and went home, you have to understand the deep, structural chaos they were actually trying to contain. Because the Nexperia crisis was never just about China versus the Netherlands. It was a high-stakes stress test of global capitalism, where the subsidiary mutinied against its owner. The most fascinating part of this story is that the Dutch government's intervention was not the start of the fight. It was the reinforcement for a rebellion already in progress. The real crisis began when Nexperia BV, the Dutch company that was bought and paid for by the Chinese parent company Wingtech, turned on its new owner and its own CEO. Tonight we analyze the incredible corporate mutiny that triggered the political firestorm, and the economic pressure that forced the Dutch to surrender, and why. Even with the politicians gone, the chip supply chain remains fatally exposed by a civil war at the very heart of the company. The conflict began with an explosive corporate divorce over jurisdiction and control. Yes, Wingtech bought Nexperia. Wingtech's founder, Zhang Zhujiang, came in as CEO. But in the Netherlands, a subsidiary's board has a fiduciary duty to the company itself, its employees, its long-term health, not simply the majority shareholder. The Dutch board accused the CEO, Zhang Zhujiang, of attempting to move assets and intellectual property out of Nexperia and into his own separate manufacturing entity in China, an entity not owned by Nexperia. They alleged he was asset stripping, revoking banking powers, and behaving bordering on recklessness, according to later court documents. In response, the Dutch management used the only weapon they had, the rule of law. Months before the government acted, the Amsterdam Enterprise Chamber, a Dutch court, suspended CEO Zhang Zhujiang from his directorships and placed Wingtech's voting rights over Nexperia's shares under the management of an independent administrator. This was the mutiny. The court order froze Wingtech's ability to exercise control over its own subsidiary. Nexperia BV was suddenly a ship sailing under an independent corporate flag. The government's political seizure, when it came, simply gave the newly independent board state-level protection to continue the fight against its owner. This legal firewall is the reason the chaos persists. Once the Dutch government stepped in, the conflict escalated to the state level. The Dutch were protecting a corporate mutiny and China responded with economic coercion. The political will of the Netherlands had a price tag, and China made sure that price was far too high. China's counterpunch was simple. They cut off the flow of finished chips from Nexperia's 4 Chinese packaging and testing facilities. This action immediately paralyzed European industry. Major German automakers like Volkswagen and core suppliers like Bosch were put on a countdown to a production halt. The fear wasn't about the technology. It was about economic contagion spreading across the EU. The Dutch government quickly realized that maintaining their national security principle meant destroying their partners' economies. They were facing immense pressure from Brussels and Berlin to end the crisis. China successfully deployed its economic leverage, and the cost of defending the legal principle of the Nexperia BV board became politically unbearable. The political surrender came this week. The Dutch government announced it was suspending its intervention. The official line was that China had shown constructive cooperation and partially resumed shipments. But in reality, the political maneuver was a face-saving exit. The Chinese were simply too big to block. The Dutch retreat proves that when economic stability clashes with geopolitical principle, the West will choose stability every time. The political phase of the Nexperia saga is over, but the structural, legal, and corporate chaos is not. The chips are still not safe. The Dutch government's suspension of its control means there is now no external referee to manage the situation. The corporate civil war that began with the board mutiny is now back on with both hands off the wheel. The fight is still between Nexperia BV, the Dutch headquarters run by court-approved management, and Nexperia China, which is still loyal to the ousted Wingtech founder. The key conflict remains wafers and money. Nexperia BV is accusing the Chinese subsidiaries of operating outside governance, refusing to pay for wafers, and attempting to divert funds. Conversely, the Chinese side is accusing the Dutch management of malicious sabotage by blocking the supply of new, critical wafers. This is a governance nightmare, a fight over asset control, cash flow, and intellectual property that threatens to freeze the entire supply chain. The Chinese factories have been running down existing chip inventory, but without new wafer input from the European side, the line will seize up again very soon. This structural conflict over who gets to move what assets and under whose jurisdiction remains the ultimate choke point. The economic paralysis of the European auto industry was the short-term consequence of the Nexperia Saga, but the long-term damage is far more severe, and it is self-inflicted. The Nexperia Saga has fundamentally undermined Europe's pitch to Chinese investors. For years, Europe has relied on its reputation as a safe, predictable, rules-based environment where property rights are absolute. This was the lure that brought Chinese capital into crucial industries, from electric vehicles and batteries to technology. Now that trust is shattered. Beijing and major Chinese corporate bodies have issued formal warnings that the Dutch action sets a dangerous precedent, where a European government, citing national security, can effectively nullify a Chinese ownership stake and side with a local board's mutiny. They see the suspension of CEO Jiang Zhujiang and the freezing of Wingtech's voting rights as arbitrary confiscation masked by corporate law. Going forward, why would any major Chinese technology firm invest billions in a factory in the Netherlands, Germany, or the UK, knowing that if geopolitical tensions rise, their entire investment and their right to manage their own assets can be frozen overnight? The Nexperia case will become the chilling case study cited in every Chinese boardroom, forcing firms to pivot their capital away from Europe and towards emerging markets or back home. The pursuit of economic security has paradoxically made Europe a much less secure destination for the foreign investment it desperately needs. The political saga has ended in a tactical retreat by the Netherlands. But the fundamental tension, that a Chinese owner tried to operate under one set of rules, and the Dutch subsidiary board fought back using another, has proven to be the most destabilizing force of all. The Nexperia Saga has shown the difficulty of owning an essential technology company across rival jurisdictions. The political surrender has only opened the door for the legal and corporate conflict to continue, unchecked. The question remains, how long can the European auto industry survive if the core components of the chipmaker they rely on are being fought over, bank account by bank account, in a bitter, unregulated corporate divorce? This is not the end of the story. The chips may be flowing for now, but the company is in chaos. Subscribe to Last Thing Before Sleeping and turn on notifications to track this entire explosive story, because the next shoe to drop will not be a government decree but a corporate legal filing, and the ultimate cost will be the total erosion of investor trust. Click the link in the description to watch the full Nexperia Saga playlist right now.